For 30 years, I gave everything I had to my son Daniel. Every drop of sweat, every tear, every dollar I earned went toward giving him the best life possible. I worked myself to the bone, never complaining, never asking for anything in return. All I wanted was to see him succeed, to see him happy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But the day I announced my retirement, his true colors came out. The mask fell away, revealing someone I barely recognized. The words he spat at me that day shattered my heart into a million pieces. "What do you mean you're retiring? You're still perfectly healthy. What are you going to do? Just sit around and become a burden to everyone?" A burden? That's all I was to him, after everything I'd sacrificed. What my son didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have imagined, was that my retirement wasn't born of necessity or weakness. My former employer, Dr. Anderson, had left me with far more than just memories of our 20 years working together. He'd left me with a fortune, one that would change everything. And standing there in that kitchen, watching my own son's face twist with contempt at the thought of supporting me in my golden years, I made a decision. It was time to stop giving. It was time to finally live for myself. I never planned to work as a medical receptionist for 30 years. When I first took the job at Dr. Anderson's practice in Oak Ridge, it was supposed to be temporary, just something to keep us afloat after my husband walked out, leaving me alone with 5-year-old Danny. But temporary turned into permanent, and before I knew it, decades had passed. Dr. Anderson wasn't just my employer. He became a dear friend. He saw how hard I worked to provide for Danny, how I skipped lunches to save for Danny's college fund, how I took extra shifts on weekends and holidays to afford the baseball camps and private tutoring that Danny needed. He watched me age at that front desk, my hair turning from brown to silver, my hands growing more weathered with each passing year. "Eleanor," he'd tell me, "you're the backbone of this practice. I couldn't do this without you." I'd smile and wave him off, but those words meant everything to me. In a world where I often felt invisible, Dr. Anderson saw me. When Danny graduated from college and landed his first job at a marketing firm in the city, I thought my heart might burst with pride. I'd done it. I'd given him everything he needed to succeed in life. He married Victoria, a beautiful, polished woman from a wealthy family, and they bought a house in Lakewood, not far from where we'd always lived. "Mom," Danny told me, beaming, "we got an extra bedroom just for you, for when you're ready to retire, you know. You can move in with us, help with the grandkids when they come along." I'd cried that night, touched by his thoughtfulness, by his gratitude. But then Dr. Anderson died. It was sudden, a heart attack in his sleep. At the funeral, I stood in the back, my black dress hanging loose on my frame. I'd lost weight from the stress, from the grief. He'd been more than a boss to me. He'd been my rock. A week later, Martin Hayes, Dr. Anderson's attorney, called me into his office. "Eleanor," he said, placing his hands flat on the desk between us, "I have something important to discuss with you." I nodded, assuming it was about the closure of the practice, perhaps some final paperwork that needed my signature. Dr. Anderson left explicit instructions in his will. The practice is being sold to a medical group, and the proceeds from that sale, along with a significant portion of his personal investments, are being transferred to you. I stared at him, uncomprehending. How much?" I finally managed to ask. Martin slid a document across the desk. I looked down at the number and felt the room spin. $7 million. "He left a letter for you as well," Martin said, handing me an envelope. With trembling fingers, I opened it and began to read. "My dear Eleanor, if you're reading this, I've left this world behind. Don't grieve too much for me. I've lived a good life. A life made better by having you in it. For 30 years, I've watched you sacrifice everything for your son. I've seen your dedication, your unwavering love, your selflessness. I've also seen how little time you've had for yourself, how many dreams you've set aside. Consider this my final prescription. I want you to live, Eleanor. Really live. Take trips. Buy beautiful things. Pursue passions. Rest. You've earned every penny of this inheritance, not just through your exceptional work at the practice, but through the exceptional human being you've always been. With deepest affection and respect, William Anderson. Tears streamed down my face as I finished reading. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my purse. It was too much to process all at once. The funds have already been transferred to an account in your name, Martin explained. Dr. Anderson set it up months ago, anticipating this eventuality. You're a wealthy woman, Eleanor. I nodded, still dazed. I need time to think. That evening, I sat alone in my modest apartment, the same one I'd lived in for 20 years to save money for Danny's future. I stared at the bank app on my phone, at the string of zeros that had appeared in my account balance. It didn't seem real. I decided not to tell Danny right away. I wanted to process this change in my circumstances first, to make plans. Besides, his birthday was coming up in a few weeks. I'd surprise him then, tell him I could help with the down payment on that vacation home he and Victoria had been eyeing in Aspen. I'd set up college funds for my future grandchildren. I'd take care of them all. But first, I needed to retire. The practice was closing anyway with Dr. Anderson gone, and at 65, I'd given enough of my life to work. It was time. The opportunity to tell Danny came sooner than expected. He called me the following weekend, inviting me over for Sunday dinner. "Mom, great news," he said over the phone. "Victoria's pregnant. We just found out yesterday." My heart soared. A grandchild. "Oh, Danny, that's wonderful. I'll be right over." "We need to celebrate." I arrived at their house in Lakewood with flowers and a bottle of sparkling cider for Victoria. Their home was beautiful, far nicer than anything I could have provided for Danny growing up. 4 bedrooms, an open-concept living space, hardwood, floors throughout. It was exactly what I'd always wanted for him. Victoria greeted me with her usual polite smile, accepting the gifts with a nod. Her mother, Patricia, call me Patty, was already there, seated regally on the sofa like she owned the place. She'd never particularly warmed to me, always making little comments about my modest appearance, my work as a receptionist, but I tolerated her for Danny's sake. "Mom!" Danny emerged from the kitchen, giving me a quick hug. "Isn't it amazing? You're going to be a grandmother." "It's the most wonderful news," I agreed, smiling at Victoria. "How are you feeling, dear?" Victoria placed a hand on her still flat stomach. "Tired, nauseous. But the doctor says everything looks perfect." "Speaking of work," I said, seizing the opportunity, "I have news too. I'm retiring." There was a moment of silence. Danny's smile faltered. "Retiring? But the practice is closing because Dr. Anderson died, right? Shouldn't you be looking for another job?" I shook my head. "No, Danny, I'm 65. I've worked enough. It's time for me to rest." Victoria and Patty exchanged a glance. "Rest?" Victoria repeated, as if the word were foreign. "But what will you do for money? You don't exactly have a robust retirement plan, do you?" The question stung, but I kept my composure. "I've saved enough," I said simply, not ready to reveal the full extent of my new circumstances. "I'll be fine." Patty leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Eleanor, be reasonable. Social Security barely covers groceries these days. You should be looking for another position." "Actually," I said, my voice growing firmer, "I was thinking this might be the perfect time for me to move in here. Into that spare bedroom you mentioned, Danny. I could help with the baby when it comes. Be here for Victoria during the pregnancy. Oh, that won't be necessary, Victoria cut in quickly. We've already decided to convert the spare room into a proper nursery, and Mother has already arranged for a professional night nurse for the first 3 months. My smile froze on my face. I see. Danny cleared his throat uncomfortably. It's just, you don't have any experience with newborns, Mom. Victoria's family has always used the best childcare professionals. It makes sense for us to do the same. I raised you, didn't I? The words slipped out before I could stop them. That was different, Danny said dismissively. Times have changed. Childcare is more scientific now. Patty nodded vigorously. Absolutely. It requires specialized training. I'm sure I could learn, I insisted, feeling increasingly desperate. And in the meantime, I could help around the house, cook meals. We have a cleaning service, Victoria said flatly. And I've been taking gourmet cooking classes for years. We don't need help with any of that. I fell silent, hurt blooming. In my chest, they didn't want me here. That much was becoming painfully clear. Danny sighed, rubbing the back of his neck, a gesture he'd had since childhood, one that always appeared when he was frustrated. Look, Mom, the truth is, we're going to be stretched thin financially with the baby coming. The night nurse, the nursery renovations, the college fund we need to start. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We were actually hoping you might be able to help out a bit. I stared at him, uncomprehending. Help out? Financially, Victoria clarified coolly. Since you're not going to be working anymore, you could move somewhere less expensive and contribute what you save toward the baby's expenses. It would be a meaningful way for you to be involved. The room seemed to tilt slightly. They weren't offering me a place to live. They were asking me to downsize even further so I could give them money. I don't understand, I said slowly. You want me to move to an even smaller apartment so I can send you money for your child's expenses? Patty made a dismissive gesture. Oh, Eleanor, don't be so dramatic. Daniel is simply pointing out that if you're really retiring, you should be looking at senior living facilities anyway. There's one on the edge of town that offers work-for-stay programs. You could serve in the dining hall or help with activities to offset the cost of your room. My mouth fell open. They were suggesting I go live in a retirement home and work as a server at 65. I'm not going to a retirement home, I said firmly. And I'm not going to work in a dining hall. I'm retiring. That means I'm done working. Then where exactly do you plan to live? Victoria asked, her voice laced with condescension. Your lease is up next month, isn't it? And rent keeps going up in this town. Be realistic, Eleanor. My voice caught. I thought I would live here, with family. Danny shook his head. Mom, we just told you. We need the spare room for the nursery. And with the baby coming, we really need to be practical about our finances. We can't support you. Support me? I echoed, stunned. When have I ever asked you to support me, Danny? When? He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. You're asking now, aren't you? Wanting to move in here? Expecting us to provide for you? I felt as though I'd been slapped. 30 years of sacrifice, of putting his needs before my own. And this was what he thought of me, a burden seeking handouts. Victoria leaned forward, her voice falsely gentle. There's no shame in needing help at your age, Eleanor. But you have to be realistic about what you can contribute. If you can't contribute financially because you're retiring, perhaps you should reconsider retirement. There are plenty of receptionist positions for someone with your experience. The way she said experience made it clear she meant limited skills. I'd been tolerating Victoria's subtle digs for years, but something about this one hit differently. Maybe it was the way Patty nodded along smugly. Maybe it was the way Danny stared at the floor, saying nothing in my defense. Or maybe it was simply that after years of giving and giving, I was finally empty. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. "I see," I said quietly. "Well, thank you for your concern about my living situation. I'll figure something out." "Mom," Danny began, "don't be like that. We're just trying to help you plan realistically." "Are you?" I asked, meeting his gaze directly. "Or are you trying to make sure I keep working so I can fund your child's expenses while not actually being involved in their life?" Victoria gasped, offended. "That's completely unfair." "Is it?" I continued, my voice gaining strength. "Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you want my money but not me. You want me to keep working at 65 so I can send you checks, but you don't want me living here, helping with my own grandchild." "That's not," Danny started, but Patty cut him off. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Eleanor, stop being so sensitive. Daniel is just being practical. What did you expect? That you could just retire with no savings and move in here like some freeloader? The world doesn't work that way." I looked at her, then at Victoria, and finally at my son, the boy I'd given everything for, now a man who couldn't even stand up for me against these women. "No," I said softly. "I suppose it doesn't." I gathered my purse and walked toward the door. No one tried to stop me. As I reached for the handle, a thought struck me. I turned back. "Danny, do you remember how you got through college?" He frowned, confused by the change in subject. "Student loans, like everyone else." I shook my head slowly. "No loans, Danny. I paid for every semester in cash. I worked 3 jobs sometimes to make sure you never had to take on debt." His face registered surprise. "But," I thought, "and that trip to Europe after graduation? The one where you met Victoria? That was my gift to you. I saved for 5 years to give you that experience." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "What's your point, Eleanor?" "My point," I said evenly, "is that I have never been a burden to anyone. I have only ever given. And now that I'm finally ready to live for myself, I discover that my own son sees me as nothing but a wallet with a pulse." "Mom, that's not fair," Danny protested weakly. "Isn't it?" I asked. "Then tell me, why is it that when I announce my retirement, your first thought isn't good for you, Mom? You deserve it. But rather, how can you still be useful to us?" No one answered. Patty looked away. Victoria examined her manicure. Danny stared at the floor. "That's what I thought," I said, and walked out the door. I made it all the way to my car before the tears came. Sitting behind the wheel, I let myself really cry for the first time in years. Deep, heaving sobs that felt ripped from the center of my being. How had I raised a son who could treat me this way? Where had I gone wrong? When the tears finally subsided, I felt hollow, but somehow lighter. I took out my phone and pulled up the banking app, staring at those zeros that still didn't seem real. $7 million. Dr. Anderson had given me more than money. He'd given me freedom. Freedom from work, yes, but now I realized he'd also given me freedom from obligation. Freedom to choose. I started the car and drove away from my son's house, not yet knowing where I was headed but certain of one thing. I wouldn't be coming back. Not as the same woman, anyway. Not as the self-sacrificing mother who gave and gave until there was nothing left of herself. It was time for Eleanor Johnson to start living for Eleanor Johnson. And if my son and his wife thought I was useless, now, well, they had no idea what was coming. That night, I checked into the Willows, a luxury hotel on the outskirts of town. I'd driven aimlessly after leaving Danny's house, tears blurring my vision, hands gripping the wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. When the tears finally subsided, I found myself on Maple Avenue, staring up at the elegant facade of what had always seemed an unattainable dream. Just one night, I told myself as I pulled into the parking lot. One night to collect my thoughts. The lobby gleamed with polished marble and crystal chandeliers. I approached the front desk hesitantly, suddenly conscious of my sensible shoes and department store dress. "Good evening." The receptionist greeted me with a practiced smile. "Do you have a reservation with us?" "No," I admitted. "I was hoping you might have a room available." Her fingers tapped across the keyboard. "We do have a junior suite available. It's $450 per night." Before my inheritance, that figure would have made me gasp, turn around, and walk straight back to my car. Now, I simply nodded. "That will be fine." The receptionist's eyes widened slightly. I must not have looked like their typical guest. "Excellent. How many nights will you be staying with us?" I paused, considering. "Let's start with 3. I may extend." I handed over my credit card, half expecting it to be declined despite knowing the money was there. The transaction went through seamlessly. Minutes later, I was being escorted to a suite larger than my entire apartment. "Will there be anything else, Ms. Johnson?" the bellhop asked after showing me around the room. I shook my head, pressing a $20 bill into his hand, a gesture that felt both foreign and exhilarating. When the door closed behind him, I stood alone in the center of the suite, taking in the king-sized bed with its mountain of pillows, the marble bathroom with a soaking tub, the sitting area with plush chairs positioned to enjoy the view of Oak Ridge, twinkling below. I moved to the window, pressing my palm against the cool glass. Somewhere down there was the small apartment I'd called home for 2 decades. Somewhere down there was my son and his wife, probably already forgetting our conversation, secure in their certainty that I'd come crawling back, accepting whatever scraps of consideration they deigned to offer. "Not this time," I whispered to my reflection. I pulled out my phone and dialed Martin Hayes, Dr. Anderson's attorney. "Eleanor," he answered warmly. "I was hoping to hear from you. How are you processing everything?" "I'm ready to make some changes," I told him without preamble. "My lease is up next month, and I won't be renewing. I need to find a new place to live, something comfortable." There was a pause. "I see. Are you thinking of buying a property?" "Yes," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "Something just for me. Something beautiful. I can put you in touch with an excellent realtor who specializes in higher-end properties. Her name is Jessica Morgan." "That would be perfect." Martin's voice softened. "And how is your family taking the news about your inheritance?" I swallowed hard. "They don't know yet. And for now, I'd prefer to keep it that way. Of course, client confidentiality is absolute. But Eleanor, if I may, don't you think your son would be happy for you?" The question hung in the air, heavy, with assumptions that no longer matched my reality. If Martin had asked me that question just 24 hours earlier, I would have answered with an enthusiastic yes. Now, I knew better. "No," I said quietly. "I don't think he would be happy for me at all. I think he would see it as his money, not mine." Martin was silent for a long moment. "I understand. We'll proceed however you wish." After hanging up, I ordered room service, a steak dinner with a glass of red wine, something I would never have indulged in before. When it arrived, I ate slowly, savoring each bite, allowing myself to enjoy the luxury without guilt. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in years. The following morning, Jessica Morgan called me, her voice brisk and professional. "Mr. Hayes spoke highly of you, Ms. Johnson. I understand you're in the market for a new home. Tell me what you're looking for." I hesitated, still unfamiliar with the idea that I could have preferences, desires, choices. "Something light, with big windows. I've lived in dark, small spaces for too long." "Any particular neighborhood? Number of bedrooms? Price range?" "I'm not familiar with the higher-end areas," I admitted. But I'd like to be somewhere peaceful. Maybe near water. 2 bedrooms would be plenty. And as for price, I took a deep breath. Up to $1 million. Jessica didn't miss a beat. I have several properties that might interest you. Are you available to tour them today? That afternoon, Jessica picked me up from the Willows in her sleek black SUV. She was younger than I expected, perhaps in her early 30s, with a sharp bob and an even sharper smile. I've selected 5 properties to show you today, she explained, as we drove. All within your specifications, though they range in price and amenities. I thought it would help you narrow down what really matters to you. The first 4 properties were lovely, spacious condos and upscale developments, each with their own appeal. But it was the 5th property that took my breath away. As we pulled through the gates of Riverside Estates, my heart quickened. The community was nestled along the banks of the river that cut through Oak Ridge, with lush landscaping and elegant homes set back from winding roads. This is the crown jewel of my listings, Jessica said as we approached a Cape Cod-style home with a wraparound porch. Just came on the market last week. The owners are relocating overseas and need a quick sale. The moment I stepped inside, I knew. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting warm patterns across hardwood floors. The open floor plan flowed from a chef's kitchen to a living room centered around a stone fireplace. French doors opened, onto a deck overlooking the river, where ducks glided peacefully across the water. The master suite is upstairs, Jessica continued, leading me up a graceful staircase. Along with a 2nd bedroom that would make a perfect home office or guest room. The master bedroom was like something from a dream, spacious yet cozy, with a sitting area nestled in a bay window. The ensuite bathroom featured a soaking tub positioned to enjoy the river view. "It's perfect," I whispered, almost afraid to say it too loudly, as if doing so might make it disappear. "It's listed at $975,000, Jessica said, watching my reaction, carefully. But given the owner's situation, they might be open to a reasonable offer. I turned to her, my decision already made. "I'd like to make an offer. The full asking price with a quick closing." Jessica's eyebrows rose slightly, but her professional demeanor never slipped. That would certainly appeal to the sellers. Let's go back to my office and draw up the paperwork. 3 weeks later, I stood in the empty living room of my new home, keys in hand. The closing had gone smoothly. Cash purchases tend to do that. And the previous owners had left behind a few pieces of furniture they didn't want to ship overseas. The house wasn't fully furnished yet, but I had time. For the first time in my life, I had time. I walked through each room slowly, trailing my fingers along walls and windowsills, getting to know every inch of this space that was now mine. When I reached the master bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bare mattress and allowed myself a moment of pure, unadulterated pride. I had done this. Me, Eleanor Johnson, who had spent decades scrimping and saving, who had worn the same winter coat for 15 years to afford her son's SAT prep classes, now owned a home in Riverside Estates. My ringing phone interrupted my reverie. The screen displayed Danny's name. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the accept button. We hadn't spoken since that night at his house. Part of me, the part that had been a mother for so long that it was almost instinct, wanted to answer, to hear his voice, to make everything right between us. But another part of me, the part that was just beginning to emerge, the part that belonged solely to Eleanor, hesitated. What more was there to say? He had made his position clear. I was only valuable to him as a resource, not as a person, not as a mother. I let the call go to voicemail. Seconds later, a text appeared. "Mom, where are you? Your landlord said you moved out. Call me ASAP." I set the phone down without responding. Of course, he'd only noticed my absence when he needed something from me. Typical. Instead of calling him back, I did something that felt almost scandalously self-indulgent. I drove to the most expensive furniture store in Oak Ridge and spent the afternoon selecting pieces for my new home. A plush sectional sofa for the living room, a dining table crafted from reclaimed wood, a four-poster bed for the master suite, with a mattress so luxurious the salesperson assured me it would feel like sleeping on a cloud. "Would you like to finance your purchases?" the sales manager asked as I completed my selections. "No," I replied, enjoying the flicker of surprise in his eyes as I handed over my credit card. "I'll pay in full today." The delivery was scheduled for the following day. That night, I slept on a blow-up mattress in my empty bedroom, windows open to let in the spring breeze and the gentle sounds of the river. Despite the humble accommodations, I felt like a queen in a castle. The next morning, my doorbell rang, just as I was finishing my coffee. Expecting the furniture delivery crew, I opened the door without checking the peephole, a mistake I immediately regretted. Danny stood on my porch, his expression a mixture of confusion and annoyance. Behind him, Victoria waited in their car, engine running, her face obscured by large sunglasses. "Mom?" Danny's eyes darted past me, taking in what he could see of the house. "What is this place? How did you—" "Hello, Danny," I said, keeping my voice steady. "This is my new home." He blinked rapidly, struggling to process this information. "But how can you afford this? You said you were retiring. You don't have this kind of money." The bluntness of his assessment would have stung once. Now, it just reinforced what I already knew about how he saw me. "There's a lot you don't know about me," I said simply, "including my financial situation." He frowned, a vertical line appearing between his brows, a gesture so reminiscent of his childhood self that my heart ached briefly. "What's that supposed to mean? Have you been hiding money from me? From us?" The us didn't escape my notice. Already, Danny and Victoria had become a unit, with me on the outside. "I haven't been hiding anything," I replied. "I just haven't been volunteering information that wasn't relevant to you." Danny's frown deepened. "Not relevant. Mom, we're family. Of course your finances are relevant to me, especially now with the baby coming." Ah, there it was. The real reason for his visit. "Is that why you're here, Danny? Because you've realized I might have money after all and you want some of it?" His cheeks flushed. "That's a horrible thing to say. I'm here because I was worried about you. Your landlord said you moved out with no forwarding address. Your phone goes straight to voicemail. What was I supposed to think?" "You were supposed to think that I'm an adult making my own decisions," I said firmly. "And as for being worried, you didn't seem particularly concerned about my welfare when you suggested I go live in a retirement home and work in a dining hall at 65. Danny had the grace to look slightly abashed. "That wasn't my idea. That was Victoria's mother." "Which you didn't contradict," I cut in. "You sat there and let her suggest that your mother, who raised you single-handedly, who worked 3 jobs to put you through college, should spend her retirement years serving food to strangers just to have a roof over her head. Mom, be reasonable. We didn't know you had." He gestured vaguely at the house. "All this. You never said anything. You've been a receptionist your whole life. How were we supposed to know you could afford a place like this?" "You weren't," I admitted. "But does that excuse how you treated me? Would it have been acceptable to treat me that way if I really couldn't afford this house? If I really had nowhere to go?" Danny shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I think we got off on the wrong foot the other night. Everyone was stressed. Things were said that shouldn't have been. Why don't you come over for dinner tonight? We can start fresh. Victoria and I were talking, and we think maybe it would be good to have you nearby after the baby comes. Not living with us, of course, but available." I almost laughed at the transparent shift in his attitude now that he'd seen my house. From burden to useful resource in the span of a 5-minute conversation. I'm afraid I have plans tonight, I said coolly. In fact, my schedule is quite full these days. A car pulled into the driveway behind Danny's, the furniture delivery truck. He glanced back at it, then at me, his expression now openly suspicious. Where did the money come? From Mom? Are you in some kind of trouble? Because if you've gotten mixed up in something illegal? The suggestion was so absurd, so insulting, that I felt a surge of anger. The only trouble in my life right now is standing on my porch, accusing me of criminal activity, because he can't fathom that his mother might actually be successful without his knowledge or assistance. Danny recoiled as if I'd slapped him. I didn't mean— I think you should go, I said, stepping back and beginning to close the door. The delivery men need to get through. Mom, wait. Goodbye, Danny. I shut the door firmly, leaning against it until I heard his footsteps retreat, followed by the sound of a car pulling away. Only then did I allow myself to tremble, to feel the full weight of what had just happened. I had stood up to my son. I had refused to be manipulated or guilted. I had claimed my own space, my own life. It felt terrible and wonderful all at once. The furniture delivery went smoothly. By evening, my new home had begun to take shape. The living room arranged around the fireplace, the dining table positioned to capture the river view, the master bedroom transformed into a serene retreat. As I sipped a glass of wine on my deck, that evening, watching the sunset paint the river in shades of gold and crimson, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Danny. We need to talk. This isn't like you, Mom. I'm worried. I set the phone aside without responding. Of course, this wasn't like me. The me he knew, the me who had always put his needs first, who had never claimed anything for herself. That woman was gone. In her place was someone new, someone who was just beginning to discover who she might be when she wasn't defined by sacrifice. The following week passed in a blur of activity. I shopped for household items, arranged for landscapers to maintain the extensive gardens, sorted through the few possessions I'd brought from my apartment to determine what deserved a place in my new life. I visited art galleries in Oak Ridge's cultural district, selecting pieces that spoke to me for my bare walls. I enrolled in a watercolor painting class at the community center, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. Danny called every day. I let each call go to voicemail. His messages grew increasingly frustrated, then concerned, then angry. Mom, this is ridiculous. Just call me back. What's going on with you? This isn't normal behavior. Victoria's really upset about all this. The stress isn't good for the baby. Fine, ignore me. But at least tell me where the money came from. I have a right to know. That last message made me laugh out loud. A right to know? By what measure? Because he was my son? Because being born of my body entitled him to information about my finances? The entitlement was breathtaking. On Friday afternoon, as I was returning from a visit to a nearby nursery with plants for my deck, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked in front of my house. A woman leaned against it, arms crossed, expression tight. Patricia Reynolds, Victoria's mother. I briefly considered turning around and driving away, but that would only postpone the inevitable. Besides, this was my home. I wouldn't be chased away from it. I parked in the driveway and got out, steel in my spine. Patricia, I greeted her neutrally. This is unexpected. She pushed away from her car, her designer handbag swinging from the crook of her arm. What game are you playing, Eleanor? I wasn't aware I was playing one, I replied, moving to retrieve the plants from my trunk. Patricia stepped closer, her voice lowering to a hiss. Don't be coy. You show up driving a new car, living in Riverside Estates, buying furniture and art like some lottery winner. Daniel is beside himself trying to figure out what's going on. Victoria is stressed, which isn't good for my grandchild. So I'll ask, again, what game are you playing? I straightened, meeting her gaze directly. No game, Patricia. I'm simply living my life. As for Danny's concerns, they're not my responsibility. He's a grown man. A grown man who deserves to know if his mother has suddenly come into money that could help secure his child's future, she shot back. There it was again, that assumption that any money I had should naturally flow toward Danny and Victoria. That my resources existed primarily for their benefit, not my own. My financial situation is my business, I said firmly. Not Danny's, not Victoria's, and certainly not yours. Patricia's eyes narrowed. So you admit it. You do have money. Money you've been hiding all this time while Daniel struggled with student loans, while he and Victoria saved for years to buy their house. How selfish can you be? The accusation was so backwards, so divorced from reality, that I couldn't help but laugh, a short, sharp sound that clearly caught Patricia off guard. Selfish? I repeated. I worked 60-hour weeks for decades to put Danny through college debt-free. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment so he could have the best of everything. I wore secondhand clothes and drove used cars and never took vacations so he could have every opportunity. And now, finally, when I have something for myself, I'm selfish. Patricia seemed momentarily flustered by my vehemence, but she recovered quickly. Well, clearly you had more than you let on. Daniel tells me you claim to have paid for his college in cash. If that's true, you were obviously keeping secrets even then. Not secrets, I corrected her. Sacrifices. Ones that Danny apparently never noticed or appreciated. And now that I'm finally doing something for myself, all of you are suddenly deeply concerned about my finances. Funny how that works. A neighbor walking her dog glanced curiously in our direction. Patricia noticed and lowered her voice. Listen to me, Eleanor. Daniel is worried sick. Victoria is stressed, which could harm the baby. Is that what you want? To cause harm to your own grandchild before it's even born? The emotional manipulation was so transparent, it was almost laughable. Almost. What I want, I said evenly, is to be treated with basic respect. Not as a burden when I'm perceived as poor, and not as a piggy bank now that you think I might have money, just as a human being with the right to make my own decisions about my own life. Patricia scoffed. How dramatic. No one is treating you like a piggy bank. Daniel just deserves to know. Danny doesn't deserve to know anything about my finances, I interrupted. And frankly, neither you nor Victoria have any claim whatsoever on how I choose to spend my money. So that's it? After all Daniel has done for you, you're just going to shut him out, live in luxury while ignoring your own son and grandchild? The question hung in the air between us, so loaded with false premises that I hardly knew where to begin unpacking it. After all Danny has done for me? I repeated slowly. And what exactly would that be, Patricia? When has Danny ever put my needs before his own? When has he ever sacrificed anything for me? She opened her mouth, then closed it again, clearly, struggling to come up with an example. That's what I thought, I said quietly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have plants to put in soil and a life to live. One that doesn't include being harassed on my own property. I gathered my purchases from the trunk and walked toward my front door without looking back. Half expecting Patricia to follow me to continue the confrontation, I was relieved when I heard her car door slam and the engine start. Inside, I set the plants down on the kitchen counter and leaned against it, suddenly exhausted. These confrontations drained me, reopening wounds I was trying to heal. But they also strengthened my resolve. With each one, I became more certain that I had made the right choice in stepping back from a relationship that had become so one-sided, it barely deserved the name. That evening, as I arranged my new plants on the deck, my phone rang again. I checked the screen, expecting Danny or possibly even Patricia, but the name displayed was unfamiliar. George Wilson. Curious, I answered. Hello? Ms. Johnson, this is George Wilson, your neighbor from 2 doors down. We haven't officially met yet, but I wanted to introduce myself and, well, check on you after that unpleasant scene this afternoon. I felt a flush of embarrassment. You saw that? Hard to miss, he said, his voice warm with sympathy. I was working in my front garden. I hope you don't mind my calling. The community association has a directory. No, I don't mind, I assured. Him. And please call me Eleanor. Eleanor, then? I'm George. Listen, I'm having a small gathering tomorrow evening. Just a few neighbors for drinks and appetizers. Nothing formal. I'd love for you to join us, get to know some people in the community. No pressure, of course. The invitation caught me, off guard. It had been so long since I'd socialized just for the pleasure of it, without Danny as the focus or reason. That sounds lovely, I heard myself saying. What time? 7 o'clock, just come as you are. After hanging up, I sat for a long time on my deck, watching the river flow. This, I realized, was what starting over felt like. Scary and exhilarating in equal measure. New home, new neighbors, new possibilities. A life shaped by my own choices, not by the demands and expectations of others. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I was excited about what tomorrow might bring. George Wilson's small gathering turned out to be a sophisticated soiree with at least 20 neighbors in attendance. His riverfront home was even more impressive than mine, a testament to the wealth concentrated in riverside estates. The open-concept main floor gleamed with marble and hardwood, floor-to-ceiling windows capturing the sunset over the water. I hesitated at the front door, suddenly self-conscious in my simple black dress and modest jewelry. For decades, I'd been the woman who blended into the background, who wore practical, clothes that could withstand a day of work without showing stains. Standing there, I fought the urge to turn around and retreat to the safety of my new home. Ah, you must be Eleanor. A tall man with silver hair and kind eyes opened the door before I could even ring the bell. I'm George, so glad you could make it. His warm handshake and genuine smile immediately put me at ease. George ushered me inside, taking my coat and guiding me toward a group of people gathered near a stunning stone fireplace. Everyone, I'd like you to meet our newest neighbor, Eleanor Johnson. To my surprise, the group welcomed me with genuine interest rather than the polite dismissal I'd grown accustomed to at Victoria's family functions. Within minutes, I found myself deep in conversation with a retired surgeon and his wife, who lived on the opposite side of the community. How are you settling into Riverside? The surgeon's wife, Diane, asked. It can be quite an adjustment if you're coming from the city center. I'm loving the quiet, actually, I admitted, and waking up to that river view every morning feels like a gift. Which property did you purchase? Asked another woman, introducing herself as Margaret. We've had several homes change hands recently. The Cape Cod on Willow Lane, I replied. The previous owners moved overseas. Oh, the Hendersons' place. Lovely home. Jessica Morgan handled that sale, didn't she? She's my niece. Bright. Girl. Excellent realtor. I nodded, pleasantly surprised by the connection. Jessica was wonderful to work with. Very efficient. She mentioned a client who made a full-price cash offer and closed in record time, Margaret said with a knowing smile. I'm guessing that was you? I felt a flush creep up my neck. Talking about money so directly wasn't something I was accustomed. Tarta! The timing worked out well for everyone, I said diplomatically. George appeared at my elbow with a glass of champagne. Eleanor, there's someone I'd like you to meet. Diane Foster was just telling me she worked at Oak Ridge Medical Associates. For years. I believe that's where you worked as well? The woman beside him looked vaguely familiar. About my age, with stylish gray hair cut in a fashionable bob. Eleanor Johnson? She peered at me closely, then broke into a wide smile. Of course. Dr. Anderson's right hand. We didn't overlap. Much. I was in the pediatric wing, but everyone knew you were the one who kept that practice running like clockwork. The mention of Dr. Anderson sent a pang through my heart. Yes, I was there until the end. Diane's expression softened. Such a loss. He was a wonderful physician and an even better human being. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I heard what he did, Diane continued, lowering her voice slightly. For you, I mean. Left you everything. It couldn't have happened to a more deserving person. My breath caught. You knew about that? She shrugged. Medical communities are small and news travels. Don't worry. It wasn't common knowledge. But those of us who knew Bill weren't surprised. He always spoke of you with such high regard. I felt tears threatening and blinked them back. He was very generous. He saw your worth, Diane said. Firmly. Something not everyone in your life has done, from what I gathered over the years. Her knowing look suggested she'd been more aware of my personal circumstances than I'd realized. Perhaps Dr. Anderson had confided in her. It's been an adjustment, I admitted. For everyone. Diane sipped her wine thoughtfully. I imagine so. Sudden wealth has a way of revealing people's true characters, doesn't it? Before I could respond, a commotion at the front door drew everyone's attention. A woman's voice, sharp with impatience, cut through the pleasant hum of conversation. I'm telling you, she's here. Her car is parked out front. My stomach dropped. I knew that voice. George frowned, excusing himself to investigate. Moments later, he returned with an apologetic expression, followed by none other than Victoria, heavily pregnant now and glowering like a thundercloud. I'm sorry, Eleanor, George murmured. She insisted it was urgent family business. Victoria scanned the room, her gaze locking onto me with laser focus. Without acknowledging anyone else, she marched directly to where I stood, her designer handbag, clutched like a weapon. So this is where you've been hiding, she said, her voice pitched to Carrie. At cocktail parties with your new rich friends, while ignoring your own family. The room fell silent. I could feel every eye upon us, curious and uncomfortable. Victoria, I said quietly, this isn't the place for what? For honesty? For accountability. She gestured wildly, nearly spilling my champagne. You've been dodging Danny's calls for weeks. You won't answer our questions about where this sudden money came from. You're living in a house that costs more than Danny makes in 5 years, while we're struggling to prepare for a baby, your grandchild. Shame and anger burned through me in equal measure. Shame at being the center of this spectacle, anger at Victoria's entitlement and disregard for boundaries. "Ooh, how did you even find me here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Your neighbor saw Mother at your house yesterday. She mentioned you'd been invited here tonight. Victoria's lip curled. Apparently, you'll socialize with complete strangers, but not your own family. I set my champagne down carefully on a nearby table. Victoria, I understand you're upset, but this is neither the time nor the place for this conversation. Why don't we— No, she interrupted, her voice rising. I'm tired of being brushed off. Danny's beside himself with worry, and you're here sipping champagne without a care in the world. What kind of mother does that? What kind of grandmother? The accusation hung in the air, sharp and unfair. I was acutely aware of our audience, of the judgment that might be forming behind polite expressions. But then, unexpectedly, Diane stepped forward. Excuse me, she said, her voice cool and professional. I don't believe we've been introduced, but I'm Diane Foster. I worked with Eleanor, and more importantly, with Dr. William Anderson, for many years. Victoria blinked, momentarily thrown off her script. What does that have to do with anything? Everything, actually. Diane smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You see, I know exactly where Eleanor's sudden money came from. Dr. Anderson left her his entire estate when he passed away. After watching her work tirelessly for decades, often sacrificing her own needs for others, particularly her son, he wanted to ensure she could finally enjoy her retirement in comfort. Victoria's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. It was all perfectly legal, Diane continued pleasantly. Properly executed will, estate taxes paid. Eleanor earned every penny through years of loyal service and exceptional character. Something that seems to be in short supply in her family from what I'm witnessing. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. I caught several sympathetic glances directed my way, along with a few raised eyebrows aimed at Victoria. So, what? Victoria finally managed. Some old doctor leaves her millions, and suddenly she forgets she even has a son? A grandchild? On the way? I haven't forgotten anything, I said quietly, including how quickly you and Danny labeled me a burden when you thought I had nothing to offer but my presence and love. How eager you were to ship me off to a retirement home to work in a dining hall once my financial usefulness appeared to be at an end. Victoria flushed crimson. That's not what happened. You're twisting things. Am I? I stepped closer, finding strength I didn't know I possessed. Let me refresh your memory. When I told you I was retiring, your immediate concern wasn't for my well-being or happiness. It was for how I could continue to contribute financially to your household. When I suggested moving into the spare bedroom, the one Danny had promised, would be mine someday, you quickly informed me it was needed for the nursery. When I offered to help with the baby, you dismissed me as unqualified, despite the fact that I raised a child on my own while working full-time. Victoria glanced around, suddenly aware of how this was playing to the audience of my new neighbors. You're making us sound terrible. We were just being practical. Practical? I repeated. Was it practical to suggest I move somewhere? Less expensive, so I could send you what I saved in rent? Was it practical to expect a 65-year-old woman to continue working indefinitely to support her adult son's family? I never said, but you didn't contradict it either, did you? When your mother suggested I should work in a retirement home dining hall just to have a place to live, you nodded along. I took a deep breath. So yes, Victoria, I've been ignoring Danny's calls. Because for the first time in my life, I'm putting myself first. And it says something significant that the moment you discovered I might have money, you tracked me down at a private event to make demands. A heavy silence fell. Victoria's face had gone from red to white, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her pregnant belly. You've got it all wrong, she whispered, but the conviction had drained from her voice. George cleared his throat, delicately. Perhaps this is a conversation best continued privately. Victoria, was it? Would you like some water? You look a bit pale. Victoria ignored him, her eyes still locked on mine. Danny deserves to know about this inheritance. He's your son. And I'm his mother, I replied steadily. But that doesn't entitle him, or you, to my financial information, or to disrupt a private gathering to create a scene. Something in my tone must have finally reached her. Victoria glanced around, seemingly noticing for the first time the ring of onlookers witnessing her behavior. Whatever she saw in their expressions caused her to take a step back. This isn't over, she said, but the threat sounded hollow. Danny will want to hear about this. I'm sure he will, I agreed. And when he's ready to speak to me with respect, to see me as a person rather than a resource, I'll be here. Victoria turned and stalked toward the door, her exit less dramatic than her entrance, but no less final. The moment the door closed behind her, conversations erupted around the room. I felt a gentle touch on my arm and turned to find Diane. Are you all right? I nodded, though my hands were trembling. Thank you for speaking up. You didn't have to do that. Of course I did, she said simply. Bill would have expected no less. He cared deeply for you, you know. Worried about you constantly. He never said. He wasn't one to interfere, but he saw how much you gave to your son, how little you kept for yourself. The inheritance wasn't charity, Eleanor. It was recognition of your worth, something your family seems incapable of acknowledging. George appeared with a fresh glass of champagne. Well, that was certainly livelier than our usual gatherings. Are you okay, Eleanor? Would you like to step outside for some air? I accepted the champagne gratefully. I'm fine, really, just embarrassed that my family drama interrupted your lovely party. To my surprise, several neighbors had gathered closer, their expressions sympathetic rather than judgmental. Don't be embarrassed, said Margaret, the realtor's aunt. Every family has its complications. The difference is in how we handle them, and I must say you handled that with remarkable grace. Hear, hear, agreed the surgeon, raising his glass slightly. Standing your ground while maintaining your dignity. Not an easy balance to strike. A wave of warmth washed over me. These people, virtual strangers until tonight, had witnessed one of my most vulnerable moments and responded not with condemnation, but with understanding. For so long, I'd lived within the narrow confines of Danny's expectations and Victoria's judgment. To be seen and valued by others, especially in a moment of conflict, felt like a revelation. The party continued, the uncomfortable scene with Victoria gradually fading as conversations resumed. To my surprise, I found myself more welcomed than ever, drawn into discussions about community events, local politics, and plans for the upcoming summer festival. Nobody treated me as an outsider or a curiosity. I was simply Eleanor, the newest resident of Riverside Estates, with opinions and experiences worth hearing. As the evening wound down, George walked me to the door. I hope tonight hasn't soured you on our little community, he said, helping me into my coat. We're not usually quite so dramatic. I smiled. On the contrary, tonight showed me I made the right choice moving here. I'm glad to hear it. And Eleanor? His expression grew more serious. What your daughter-in-law said about being a grandmother, don't let that weigh too heavily on you. Family relationships evolve. Sometimes they need distance before they can heal. I nodded, touched by his insight. Thank you, George, for everything. Walking the short distance home along the river, I felt lighter somehow, as if some invisible burden had been lifted. Victoria's ambush had been mortifying in the moment, but its aftermath left me feeling strangely vindicated. For the first time, others had witnessed the dynamic that had shaped my relationship with Danny and Victoria. They had seen the entitlement, the disregard for boundaries, the emotional manipulation, and they had sided with me. More importantly, I had sided with myself. The following morning, I woke to a string of texts from Danny, clearly sent after Victoria had returned home and reported on our confrontation. Mom, what were you thinking letting Victoria find out about your inheritance that way? Why didn't you tell me about Dr. Anderson leaving you money? I'm your son. I had a right to know. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? Victoria says everyone at that party was judging her. Call me. We need to sort this out before it gets worse. I read the messages without responding, noting the familiar pattern. Danny's concern was entirely self-focused. How Victoria felt, how he felt, how they appeared to others. Not once did he acknowledge my feelings or perspective. Instead of calling him back, I spent the morning arranging for a cleaning service to come weekly and scheduling a consultation with a landscape designer for my neglected garden. In the afternoon, I visited Oak Ridge Art Gallery, where I purchased a striking watercolor of the river at dawn for my dining room. The gallery owner, impressed by my taste and budget, invited me to an exclusive preview of their upcoming exhibition featuring local artists. We're having a catered reception next Friday evening, she explained, handing me an elegant invitation. Just a small group of collectors and art enthusiasts. it's a wonderful opportunity to meet the artists and perhaps acquire pieces before they're available to the general public. I accepted the invitation with genuine pleasure. In my previous life, such events had existed in a parallel universe, one where people had disposable income and leisure time, where art was something to be acquired rather than admired briefly in passing. Now, somehow, I had crossed over into that world. The transition was disorienting but exhilarating. That evening, while enjoying a glass of wine on my deck, I received an unexpected call from Martin Hayes, Dr. Anderson's attorney. "Eleanor," he greeted me warmly. "How are you settling into your new home?" "Wonderfully," I replied. "I can't thank you enough for connecting me with Jessica Morgan. She made the entire process seamless." "I'm glad to hear it. The reason I'm calling, besides checking in on you, is that there's been an interesting development I thought you should know about." I straightened in my chair. "What kind of development?" "Your son visited my office today," Martin said carefully. "He was quite persistent in asking questions about Dr. Anderson's will and the terms of your inheritance." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing of substance, I assure you. Client confidentiality is absolute. But his visit raised some concerns for me. He seemed to be fishing for information about whether there might be grounds to contest the will." "Contest the will?" I echoed, disbelieving. "On what grounds?" "He mentioned Dr. Anderson's mental state in his final months, suggested there might have been undue influence given your position as his employee." Martin's tone remained professional, but I could hear the underlying disapproval. I made it very clear that the will was properly executed, with Dr. Anderson of completely sound mind and witnessed by two independent parties. There are absolutely no grounds for contest. The revelation left me speechless. Danny wasn't just disappointed that I hadn't shared information about my inheritance. He was actively looking for ways to challenge it legally, to take what Dr. Anderson had left to me. "I'm sorry to be the bearer of such news," Martin continued when I didn't respond, "but I felt you should be aware of the situation, especially if family relations are strained." "Thank you," I managed. "I appreciate your discretion and your warning." After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence as the sun set over the river. The beauty of the scene stood in stark contrast to the ugliness of what I'd just learned. My own son was attempting to undermine my inheritance, to argue that I had somehow manipulated a dying man into leaving me his fortune. The accusation was not just false, it was deeply hurtful, a fundamental misunderstanding of the relationship I'd shared with Dr. Anderson. More than that, it revealed a side of Danny I had never wanted to acknowledge. A grasping, entitled person who viewed wealth as something to be claimed rather than earned. Had I raised him to be this way? Or had I simply been blind to who he truly was all along? Either possibility was painful to contemplate. The following morning, I made an appointment with Martin to review my own estate planning. If Danny was already investigating ways to challenge Dr. Anderson's will, I needed to ensure my own assets were protected and distributed according to my wishes, not according to anyone else's sense of entitlement. That afternoon, as I was returning from a walk along the river path that wound through our community, I spotted a familiar car parked in my driveway. Danny's silver sedan gleamed in the spring sunshine, and he sat behind the wheel, apparently waiting for me to return. My steps slowed as I approached, a mixture of dread and resignation settling over me. Danny got out of the car when he saw me, his expression a careful mask of contrition. He looked tired, I noticed. Dark circles under his eyes, his normally immaculate hair slightly disheveled. "Mom," he called, moving toward me. "Please don't walk away. Just give me 5 minutes." I stopped at the edge of my property, maintaining some distance between us. "Why are you here, Danny?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache despite everything. I wanted to apologize in person for Victoria's behavior at that party, for not calling you first before she went over there. It was inappropriate. The apology was specific to Victoria's actions. I noticed, not to any of his own behavior, including his visit to Martin's office. Is that all? I asked coolly. Danny shifted uncomfortably. Look, I know things have been tense between us lately. I'm trying to make it right. By going behind my back to Dr. Anderson's attorney? By looking for ways to challenge his will? The words came out sharper than I intended, but I couldn't contain my hurt and anger. Danny's expression flickered with surprise before settling into defensiveness. He sighed heavily. Okay, yes, I met with Mr. Hayes. But only because I was concerned. It's a lot of money, Mom, and you worked for Dr. Anderson for so long. It just seemed odd that he would leave everything to his receptionist without any conditions or provisions for his family. He had no family, I corrected him. No children, no siblings. His wife died 10 years ago, and I wasn't just his receptionist. I managed his practice. I was his friend. Still, Danny persisted. $7 million? For a friendship? You have to admit it's unusual. I studied him, trying to see past the man to the boy I had raised. Had he always been this way? Seeing relationships in terms of transactions, measuring affection in dollars and cents? Had I simply refused to see it? Dr. Anderson and I shared a mutual respect that transcended our professional roles, I said carefully. He valued my work and my character, and he wanted to ensure that I could enjoy my retirement without financial worry. I paused, letting the words sink in. Something my own son apparently doesn't care about, given your eagerness to challenge. His generosity. Danny had the grace to look ashamed, if only momentarily. That's not fair. Of course I care about your retirement. I just think— You think what? That you have more right to his money than I do? That at 65, after working my entire adult life, I don't deserve financial security unless it comes with strings attached? That I should continue to prioritize your needs over my own, even now? He flinched at my tone. No, of course not. I don't understand why you didn't tell me about the inheritance right away. Why you're suddenly living this whole different life without including your family. It hurts, Mom. There was genuine pain in his voice, but I couldn't help wondering. Was he hurt because I had kept information from him, or because I had kept money from him? I didn't tell you immediately because I needed time to process it myself, I explained, softening slightly. And then, when I did come to tell you, the night I announced my retirement, your reaction made it clear that my value to you was based entirely on what I could continue to provide, not on who I am or what I might need. Danny shook his head, vigorously. That's not true. You're twisting what happened. Am I? You suggested I move somewhere cheaper so I could send you the difference in rent. Your wife and her mother proposed I work in a retirement home dining hall just to have a place to live. You made it abundantly clear that unless I was financially contributing to your household, I had no place in your life. It wasn't like that, he insisted, but his eyes slid away from mine. We were just worried about practical matters, about how you would support yourself. And now that you know I can support myself quite comfortably, you're worried about how much of that support might flow toward you, I concluded. That's why you're here, isn't it? Not just to apologize for Victoria's behavior, but to secure your piece of Dr. Anderson's estate. Danny's silence was confirmation enough. I sighed deeply, suddenly weary of the entire conversation. Go home, Danny. Talk to your wife. Prepare for your baby. Build the life you want, but do it without expecting me to fund it. I've already given you everything I had to give for 30 years. Now it's time for me to live for myself. So that's it? His voice rose with disbelief and anger. You're just cutting me off completely? Your own son. I'm not cutting you off. I corrected him gently. I'm establishing boundaries. There's a difference. When you're ready to have a relationship with me based on mutual respect rather than what I can give you materially, I'll be here. Danny stared at me as if I were a stranger. Perhaps in some ways, I was, at least to him. The mother he knew had never stood firm against his demands or expectations. She had always yielded, always sacrificed, always put his needs first. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood her own worth. "This isn't over," he said finally, echoing Victoria's parting words from the party. "We're family. You don't just walk away from family." "I'm not walking away," I replied quietly. "I'm simply asking to be treated with the same consideration and respect you'd show to anyone else in your life. If that's too much to ask, then perhaps we need this distance until things change." Danny got back into his car without another word, his face set in lines of anger and hurt. I watched him drive away, a complex mixture of emotions swirling within me. Grief for the relationship I had thought we had, determination to protect the new life I was building, and underneath it all, a flicker of hope that perhaps, with time and distance, understanding might grow. That evening, I sat on my deck as twilight settled over the river, watching herons stalk gracefully through the shallows. My phone remained silent. No more texts or calls from Danny. The confrontation had left me drained but also oddly at peace. I had spoken my truth. I had held my ground. And in doing so, I had honored not only myself, but also Dr. Anderson's final gift to me: the freedom to live authentically without compromise or apology. Whatever came next, reconciliation or continued estrangement, I would face it on my own terms. For the first time in decades, those terms would be shaped by my own needs and values, not by the expectations or demands of others. As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the velvet sky above the river, I made a silent promise to myself. The remaining years of my life would be lived with intention and joy. I would no longer be defined solely by my role as a mother or by the sacrifices I had made. I would be Eleanor Johnson, complex, worthy, and finally, gloriously free. The weeks passed in a blur of activity as I settled into my new life. My home, gradually transformed from merely beautiful to deeply personal, art on the walls that spoke to me, furniture arranged for comfort rather than show, a garden beginning to bloom under professional care, but with my own touches added. For the first time since Danny was small, I had space that was entirely my own, shaped by my preferences alone. My social circle expanded unexpectedly. George introduced me to his book club, which met monthly to discuss everything from classic literature to contemporary memoirs. Diane invited me to join a watercolor class she taught at the community center, where I discovered a latent talent I'd never had time to explore. Weekend brunches at Maple Street Cafe became a pleasant routine, often extending into afternoon conversations with new friends. Throughout this period of quiet flourishing, Danny maintained his distance. After our confrontation in my driveway, the barrage of texts and calls had ceased entirely. I told myself this was progress, a recognition perhaps that our relationship needed to evolve beyond the one-sided dynamic that had defined it for so long. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I would feel a pang of loss for the uncomplicated love we had shared when he was young. But more often, I felt relief that the tension had ebbed, even if through absence rather than resolution. That changed on a warm June morning when my doorbell rang, just as I was preparing to leave for my watercolor class. Opening the door, I found a uniformed courier holding an official-looking envelope. "Eleanor Johnson?" he confirmed, consulting his clipboard. "Yes, that's me." "This requires your signature." He offered me a digital pad to sign, then handed over the envelope with a polite nod. Inside, I found a formal legal notice. My hands began to tremble as I read the document, my vision blurring around the edges. It was a petition filed with the County Court by Daniel Johnson, my son, contesting William Anderson's will on grounds of undue influence and questionable mental capacity. I sank onto the entryway bench, the paper crumpling slightly in my grip. Despite Martin's warnings about Danny's inquiries, despite the clear signs of his entitlement, I had never truly believed he would go this far. To publicly challenge the validity of Dr. Anderson's will to suggest that I had somehow manipulated a dying man, it was beyond hurtful. It was a betrayal of everything I thought I knew about my son. With shaking fingers, I called Martin. "I just received the petition," I said without preamble when he answered. "From Danny." Martin's sigh carried through the phone. "I was afraid this might happen. I received a copy as well, as the executor of Dr. Anderson's estate. What does this mean? Can he actually challenge the will?" "He can try," Martin replied carefully. "Anyone can file a petition, but winning is another matter entirely, and in this case, the odds are overwhelmingly against him. Dr. Anderson's will was properly executed with multiple witnesses, including 2 other physicians. His mental capacity was well documented. He was seeing patients right up until the week before his death. And as for undue influence, there's simply no evidence to support such a claim." I closed my eyes, trying to process. So what happens now? Now we respond formally to the petition, presenting evidence of Dr. Anderson's capacity and the legitimacy of his will. There will likely be a hearing. It could drag on for some time, unfortunately. He paused. "Eleanor, I have to ask, are you prepared for what this might mean for your relationship with your son? These proceedings can get acrimonious." The question struck at the heart of my turmoil. Was there even a relationship left to preserve? The son I thought I knew would never have taken such an action. The son who actually existed had revealed himself to be someone I barely recognized. "My relationship with Danny is already broken," I said softly. "This just makes it official. I need to protect what Dr. Anderson intended for me. I owe him that much. I understand. I'll draft our response immediately and keep you informed of every development. Try not to worry too much. The law is firmly on our side." After hanging up, I canceled my plans for the day. The thought of making small talk while painting watercolors suddenly seemed impossible. Instead, I curled up in my window seat, watching the river flow past, trying to quiet the storm of emotions inside me. By evening, a curious calm had settled over me, not peace exactly, but a kind of clarity. Danny had made his choice, had shown me exactly who he was and what he valued. Now I would make mine. The following morning, I called Martin again. "I've been thinking about our response to Danny's petition," I began. "I want to be more aggressive than just defending the will. I want to countersue." There was a pause. "Countersue? On what grounds?" "Defamation of character, for starters. He's publicly accused me of manipulating a vulnerable man for financial gain. That's damaging to my reputation. And emotional distress. He knows exactly how much Dr. Anderson meant to me, how devastating it is to have our relationship characterized this way." Another pause, longer this time. "Eleanor, are you sure? A countersuit would significantly escalate matters. It might close the door on any possibility of reconciliation." "I'm sure," I said firmly. "Danny closed that door when he filed this petition. I'm done being the accommodating mother who absorbs every blow without response. If he wants a legal battle, he'll get one, with all the public scrutiny that entails." Martin's tone shifted, becoming more businesslike. "Very well. I'll prepare the necessary documents. In the meantime, I'd suggest compiling any evidence you have of your relationship with Dr. Anderson, correspondence, photos, witness statements from colleagues who observed your professional relationship. Anything that demonstrates the genuine friendship between you." "I can do that," I assured him. "And Martin, I want this handled quickly and decisively. No dragging it out. Understood. Over the next few days, I immersed myself in gathering materials, cards and notes Dr. Anderson had given me over the years, photographs from office celebrations, testimonials from former colleagues willing to speak about our working relationship. Each item reinforced what I already knew. Dr. Anderson's bequest had been an act of genuine affection and respect, not the result of manipulation or confusion. Meanwhile, word of the legal battle began to spread through Oak Ridge's tightly knit social circles. I first became aware of this when Diane called, her voice tight with concern. "Eleanor, have you seen the Oak Ridge Community Forum page on Facebook?" I frowned. "No, I'm not on social media. Why?" "Danny has made a post there about the will contest. It's gaining a lot of attention and not in a good way." She hesitated. "I think you should see it. I'll text you a screenshot." Moments later, my phone pinged with an incoming message. The screenshot showed a lengthy post from Danny, complete with a family photo from years ago. Danny as a child, me with my arm around him, both of us smiling at the camera. The text accompanying the image made my stomach turn. "Community of Oak Ridge, I need your help and your prayers. My mother, Eleanor Johnson, former receptionist at Dr. Anderson's practice, has fallen victim to elder abuse in the most heartbreaking. In his final, confused months, Dr. Anderson was manipulated into leaving her his entire fortune, over $7 million, cutting out his extended family entirely. Now she's living in luxury while refusing all contact with her only son and grandchild-to-be. We've been forced to take legal action to rectify this injustice, not just for our family but for Dr. Anderson's rightful heirs. Please share to raise awareness about elder exploitation in our community." My hands shook with rage as I read and reread the post. Every word was a calculated distortion, painting Dr. Anderson as confused — he had been sharp until the very end — suggesting he had family who should have inherited — he had none — positioning me as the manipulator and Danny as the concerned protector. Most galling of all was his claim that I had refused contact, when in reality, he had been the one to stop communication after I refused to share my inheritance. The comments beneath the post were a mixed bag, some expressing sympathy for Danny's difficult situation, others questioning his version of events, a few outright calling him entitled. But the damage was done. My private legal matter had been dragged into the court of public opinion, with my son casting himself as the victim and me as the villain. I called Martin immediately, forwarding him the screenshot. "This changes things," I said, my voice tight with controlled fury. "He's not just contesting the will now. He's publicly defaming me and Dr. Anderson." "I agree," Martin replied gravely. "This post crosses several lines. It could actually strengthen our countersuit considerably." He paused. "But Eleanor, be prepared. This kind of social media campaign often escalates before it resolves. He may not stop at one post." Martin's warning proved prophetic. Over the next week, Danny expanded his campaign across multiple platforms. He created a dedicated page titled "Justice for Dr. Anderson's Legacy," featuring more family photos alongside increasingly emotional appeals. He gave an interview to the local newspaper, carefully framing his narrative as one of concern rather than greed, worried about his mother's sudden personality change and the suspicious circumstances of the inheritance. Most disturbingly, he began sharing personal details about my life, my modest apartment, my years of financial struggle as a single mother, contrasted with my new home and lifestyle. Each post was crafted to imply that such a dramatic change could only be the result of something underhanded. Through it all, I maintained my public silence, focusing instead on the legal response Martin was preparing. But privately, I seethed. This calculated attack revealed a side of Danny I had never wanted to acknowledge. A manipulative streak, a willingness to distort truth for his own benefit, a complete disregard for my dignity or reputation. Then came the Instagram post that pushed me beyond my limit of tolerance. Victoria, now heavily pregnant, posted a nursery photo, the room that had once been promised as my retirement sanctuary, now decorated in pale yellows and greens. The caption read, "Preparing for our little one, despite everything. Some people choose money over family, but will always choose love. Family first. Broken promises." It was the hashtags that did it. The public accusation that I had chosen money over family, when in reality they had been the ones to reject me at my most vulnerable. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. That evening, I called George, who had become a trusted friend and advisor. "I need your help," I said, explaining the situation and my growing frustration with Danny's public campaign. "I can't stay silent anymore, but I don't want to stoop to his level." George listened thoughtfully. "Social media can be a double-edged sword," he said finally. "Used unwisely, it can backfire spectacularly. Your son is counting on your continued silence, your unwillingness to fight back publicly. Perhaps it's time to surprise him. What do you suggest?" "The truth, Eleanor. Simple, straightforward, and devastating in its clarity. No emotional appeals, no manipulation, just facts, presented with dignity. And timing is everything." The next morning, I met with Martin to refine our strategy. He had already prepared our formal legal response to Danny's petition, along with the countersuit for defamation. But now we added another element, a public statement, carefully crafted to address Danny's accusations without matching his emotional manipulation. 2 days later, when Danny's campaign seemed to be gaining the most traction, Martin filed our legal response and countersuit. Simultaneously, Diane, who was far more social media savvy than I, helped me create a single, dignified post on the same community forum where Danny had first launched his attack. "To the Oak Ridge community," it began, "I have remained silent on the matter of my inheritance from Dr. William Anderson out of respect for him and for the private nature of our relationship. However, given the public accusations made by my son, Daniel Johnson, I feel compelled to offer these facts. Dr. Anderson was of sound mind until his death, as documented by multiple medical professionals. Dr. Anderson had no living relatives to inherit his estate. The suggestion that family members were cut out of his will is false. I worked alongside Dr. Anderson for 30 years, not merely as a receptionist, but as the practice manager who handled everything from patient care to business operations. The inheritance I received was legally bestowed and represented Dr. Anderson's wish that I enjoy financial security in my retirement after decades of service. When I announced my retirement, my son and daughter-in-law informed me that I could not live with them as previously promised unless I continued working to contribute financially to their household. When I declined, they suggested I move to a retirement facility where I could work in the dining hall to earn my keep. It was only after learning of my inheritance that my son renewed contact, suddenly interested in a relationship he had previously devalued. I have never refused contact with my son. I have only asked to be treated with the basic respect due to any human being, not as a financial resource to be exploited. I did not choose money over family. My family chose money over me. First, by rejecting me when they thought I had none, then by pursuing me through legal channels when they discovered I had received an inheritance. I have filed a countersuit for defamation and emotional distress in response to the false accusations against me. I will make no further public statements on this matter and trust that the legal system will resolve it appropriately. I ask only for the same consideration and privacy that any member of this community would expect during a difficult family situation. The post included a single photograph, not an emotionally laden family picture like Danny had used, but a professional shot of me and Dr. Anderson at the practice's 25th anniversary celebration, both of us smiling, his hand resting on my shoulder in a gesture of clear respect and affection. Within hours, the post had been shared hundreds of times, far outpacing Danny's original accusations. Comments flooded in, many from former patients of Dr. Anderson's practice who remembered me from their visits, others from community members shocked by the details I had revealed about my treatment by Danny and Victoria. I always wondered how Dr. Anderson's practice ran so smoothly. Now I know it was Eleanor keeping everything together behind the scenes. The way your son and daughter-in-law treated you is disgraceful. Stay strong, Eleanor. The truth always comes out. I worked with Dr. Anderson at Oak Ridge General. He spoke of you often and with great respect. He would be appalled at how his gift to you is being twisted. Most tellingly, several comments came from people who had initially sympathized with Danny but now expressed regret for their hasty judgment. I admit I was swayed by Daniel's first post. Thank you for sharing your side. It paints a very different picture. As someone who initially believed your son's version, I owe you an apology. What your family did to you is inexcusable. By evening, Danny had taken down his original post and set his social media accounts to private. Victoria's Instagram post about the nursery had similarly vanished. Their retreat from the public arena spoke volumes about the impact of my simple, factual response. The next morning, Martin called with news. I've received communication from your son's attorney, he said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. They're requesting a meeting to discuss withdrawing the petition against Dr. Anderson's will. And our countersuit? I asked. That's part of what they want to discuss. They're hoping for a comprehensive settlement. Essentially, they drop the challenge to the will, and we drop the defamation suit. I considered this. Part of me wanted to press forward with the countersuit, to make Danny face consequences for his public attack on my character. But another part, the part that remembered him as a small boy who had once looked at me with uncomplicated love, hesitated. What would you recommend? I asked finally. From a purely legal standpoint, settling makes sense. It resolves the EI matter quickly and cleanly, without the emotional toll of prolonged litigation. But this isn't just a legal decision, Eleanor. It's a personal one. Only you can decide if you're ready to let this go. I gazed out at the river, watching the play of sunlight on water. Tell them we'll meet, I said at last. But I have conditions. The meeting was scheduled for the following week at Martin's office, neutral territory. I arrived early, my heart pounding despite my outward composure. Martin greeted me with a reassuring smile, leading me to a conference room where we waited for Danny and his attorney. When they entered, I barely recognized my son. Gone was the confident, borderline arrogant man who had confronted me in my driveway. In his place was someone who looked diminished somehow, dark circles under his eyes, shoulders slightly hunched, gaze unable to meet mine directly. His attorney, a brisk woman in her 50s, took charge immediately. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. We believe there's a path forward that can resolve this matter to everyone's satisfaction. Martin nodded. We're certainly open to discussion. My client has prepared some thoughts on what that resolution might entail. All eyes turned to me. I took a deep breath, centering myself. I'm willing to drop the countersuit for defamation under the following conditions, I began, my voice steady despite my inner turmoil. First, Danny withdraws his petition contesting Dr. Anderson's will immediately and irrevocably. Danny's attorney nodded. That's acceptable. Second, he makes a public statement on the same forums where he published his accusations, acknowledging that his claims about Dr. Anderson's mental capacity and my supposed manipulation were unfounded. This caused a slight frown. The wording of such a statement would need to be mutually agreed upon. Of course, I conceded. Third, he agrees to cease all public discussion of this matter permanently. Agreed. Finally, I said, my gaze shifting directly to Danny for the first time. He commits to a minimum 6-month period of no contact with me. Danny's head snapped up, genuine shock in his eyes. No contact? But his attorney placed a warning hand on his arm. Could you explain the reasoning behind this final condition? I kept my gaze fixed on Danny. Trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired. What you've done, publicly accusing me of elder abuse, painting me as a manipulator, trying to take away what Dr. Anderson intended for me, that can't be undone with a simple apology or legal settlement. I need time and space to determine if any kind of relationship between us is possible moving forward. Danny's face flushed. So you're cutting me off completely? Your own son? What about the baby? I'm not cutting you off, I corrected him. I'm establishing a cooling-off period. As for your child, they deserve better than to be used as leverage in this situation. When they're born, send me a photo. After the 6-month period, if you've adhered to all conditions of our agreement, we can discuss what kind of relationship might be possible with both you and your child. The attorneys exchanged glances, silently communicating in that way. Lawyers have. These terms seem reasonable, Danny's attorney said finally. We'll want them formalized in writing, of course. Of course, Martin agreed. Throughout the exchange, Danny remained silent, his expression a complex mixture of anger, hurt, and something that might have been shame. As the meeting concluded and papers were gathered, he finally spoke directly to me, his voice low. I never thought it would come to this. I met his gaze steadily. Neither did I. But we're here now, and we have to find a way forward that respects both of us. This isn't about punishing you, Danny. It's about healing. Separately, for now. He nodded once, a jerky motion that conveyed resignation more than understanding. As he turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of the boy he had been in the set of his shoulders. For a brief moment, my resolve wavered. Then I remembered the public accusations, the calculated manipulation, the willingness to destroy Dr. Anderson's legacy for personal gain, and my determination returned. Sometimes love meant setting boundaries. Sometimes healing required distance. These were lessons I had learned too late in life, but I was determined to apply them now, while I still had years ahead of me to live authentically. The formal settlement was signed 2 days later. As agreed, Danny published a retraction on all platforms where he had made his original accusations, acknowledging that Dr. Anderson had been of sound mind and that his bequest to me had been legally and ethically proper. He disabled the Justice for Dr. Anderson's Legacy page and removed all related content from his social media accounts. The public reaction was predictably mixed. Some community members praised the resolution and expressed support for both parties, moving forward. Others continued to take sides, either criticizing me for forcing a public apology from my son or condemning Danny for his original accusations. But gradually, as the days passed without new developments, interest waned. The news cycle moved on, and my private affairs receded from public view. 3 weeks after our settlement, I received a text message from Danny, the first communication since our meeting. It contained only a photograph, a newborn baby wrapped in a hospital blanket, tiny face scrunched in sleep. Beneath the image was a simple caption: James William Johnson. 7 lbs, 4 O's born yesterday at 3:42 a.m. The middle name, William, gave me pause. Was it a peace offering? A acknowledgement of Dr. Anderson's impact on our lives? Or simply a name Victoria had liked? There was no way to know, and the terms of our agreement prevented me from asking. I studied the photo for a long time, searching the tiny features for glimpses of the baby Danny had once been. My grandson. A new life untainted by the conflicts that had fractured our family. I saved the image but didn't respond. The healing period had just begun, and some distances needed to be maintained until they could be bridged properly. That evening, I sat on my deck watching the sunset, a complex mixture of emotions swirling within me. Grief for the relationship I had lost with my son, hope for what might eventually be rebuilt on healthier terms, gratitude for the new life I had created for myself, with genuine friends and meaningful pursuits, and underneath it all, a sense of quiet pride that I had finally learned to stand up for myself, to demand the respect I deserved, even from those I loved most. The river flowed on, constant yet ever-changing, much like life itself. Whatever came next, reconciliation or continued separation, I would face it on my own terms, with the dignity and self-respect Dr. Anderson had recognized in me long before I saw it in myself. For now, that was enough. A year passed. The seasons flowed one into another, summer's lush greenery yielding to autumn's fiery display, then winter's crystalline stillness, and finally spring's tender renewal. Through it all, the river outside my window remained a constant presence, sometimes mirror-smooth, sometimes churning with storm runoff, but always moving, always changing, always itself, much like me. The 6-month no-contact period with Danny had come and gone. I had honored it scrupulously, sending no messages, making no calls, though I studied each new photo of baby James that arrived monthly like clockwork. Each image showed him growing, changing, first smiles, then sitting up, then the beginning attempts at crawling. With each photo, I felt the pull of connection, the instinctive desire to be part of this child's life. But I had learned the hard way that healthy relationships required mutual respect, not just blood ties. So I waited, giving Danny the space to demonstrate whether he had truly absorbed the lessons of our conflict or merely performed contrition to achieve his immediate goals. On the exact day the no-contact period ended, my phone rang with Danny's number. I let it go to voicemail, not out of spite, but from a need to approach this potential reconnection thoughtfully rather than reactively. His message was brief. "Mom, the 6 months are up. I'd like to talk whenever you're ready. I've done a lot of thinking. Ball's in your court." I waited 3 days before responding with a text. "I'm available for coffee next Tuesday at Maple Street Cafe, 10 a.m. His reply came immediately. "I'll be there." The intervening days crawled by, anxiety and anticipation warring within me. What version of Danny would appear? The entitled son who had tried to claim my inheritance, or someone more reflective, more aware of the damage he had caused? I prepared myself for either possibility, resolved to maintain my boundaries regardless of the outcome. Tuesday morning dawned clear and mild. I arrived at the cafe early, choosing a table on the outdoor patio where the conversation would be private but still in a public setting. As I waited, sipping a latte and watching the morning bustle of downtown Oak Ridge, I mentally rehearsed what I wanted to say. Danny arrived precisely at 10, looking both familiar and somehow changed. The dark circles under his eyes had faded, but new lines around his mouth spoke of stress, or perhaps simply the adjustment to parenthood. He wore casual clothes, jeans and a button-down shirt, rather than his usual business attire. "Mom," he said, standing awkwardly beside the table. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." I gestured to the empty chair across from me. "Would you like some coffee?" He nodded, signaling to a passing server before sitting down. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the weight of the past year hanging between us. "How are you?" he finally asked, his tone carefully neutral. "I'm well," I replied. "Very well, actually. And you? How is fatherhood treating you?" A genuine smile crossed his face for the first time. "It's exhausting and amazing. James is. He's incredible, Mom. He's crawling everywhere now, getting into everything. And he has these opinions. He's not even talking yet, but somehow he makes it very clear what he wants and doesn't want." I smiled, recognizing the universal wonder of new parents discovering their child's personality. "He sounds wonderful." "He is." Danny hesitated, then pulled out his phone. "I have more pictures if you'd like to see them." "I would." He scrolled through a series of photos. James in a high chair, face smeared with pureed carrots. James in the bathtub, surrounded by bubbles. James asleep on Danny's chest, both of them looking peaceful. "He has your eyes," I observed softly. "The same shape." Danny glanced up, something vulnerable in his expression. "Victoria says that too." He put the phone away as the server delivered his coffee. After a sip, he looked at me directly. "I owe you an apology, Mom. A real one, not just the public statement the lawyers made me write." I nodded, waiting. What I did, trying to contest Dr. Anderson's will, making those accusations on social media, it was inexcusable. I was angry, and jealous, and yes, greedy. I convinced myself I was justified because you hadn't told me about the inheritance. But the truth is, I felt entitled to that money. Like I deserved a share of it just for being your son, regardless of Dr. Anderson's wishes or your rights. He shook his head. "It's embarrassing to admit, but that's the truth." The honesty in his voice was encouraging, but I remained cautious. "What changed?" Danny looked down at his coffee. "Becoming a father, for one thing. It forces you to examine yourself in ways you can't ignore. I kept thinking about what I would want for James, what kind of father I want to be, what kind of man I want him to see when he looks at me." He met my gaze again, and I realized I didn't like the answer. I didn't want him to see someone who would publicly attack his own mother for money. I felt the first crack in the wall I had built around my heart. "I appreciate your honesty. It can't have been easy to come to that realization." "It wasn't," he agreed. "I've been seeing a therapist, actually. Victoria and I both have. That's been eye-opening." This was unexpected. Danny had always dismissed therapy as something for weak people who can't handle their own problems. "What prompted that decision?" He sighed. "After everything blew up, the legal battle, the social media disaster, things got pretty bad between Victoria and me. We were fighting constantly. She blamed me for how it all played out, said I had humiliated her. I blamed her for pushing me to go after the inheritance in the first place." He paused. "It wasn't healthy, especially with a newborn in the house. We were headed for divorce until her mother, of all people, suggested counseling." Patricia suggested counseling? I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. Danny actually laughed, a short, rueful sound. "I know, right? Turns out when Victoria started talking about leaving me and raising James alone, Patricia got scared. She's from that generation where divorce is still a major stigma. So she found us this couples therapist and somehow we ended up going. And it helped?" "More than I expected," he admitted. "It forced us to talk about things we'd been avoiding, not just the situation with you and the inheritance, but deeper issues. My insecurities about Victoria's family looking down on me, her fears about motherhood, the way we both tend to value money and status over more important things." He took another sip of coffee. "We're still working on it, but we're in a better place." I nodded, absorbing this information. "I'm glad to hear that, Danny, truly. The thing is," he continued, "the more we talked in therapy, the more I realized how unfair we'd been to you. Not just during the inheritance fight, but before that, when you told us you were retiring. The therapist asked me to imagine how I'd feel if James treated me the way I treated you, and I couldn't even answer. I felt so ashamed." The vulnerability in his voice touched me, but years of maternal habit made me want to reassure him, to smooth over his discomfort. I resisted that impulse, reminding myself that growth required facing uncomfortable truths. "That's a powerful realization," I said instead. Danny nodded. "It made me see how selfish I've been for, well, probably most of my adult life." taking you for granted, assuming you would always be there to help us, never really considering what you might need or want. He met my eyes directly. I'm sorry, Mom, for all of it. Not just the legal battle, but for treating you like your only value was in what you could provide for us. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Part of me wanted to reach across the table, to take his hand and assure him all was forgiven. But another part, the part that had finally learned to value myself, held back. Apologies were important, but actions mattered more. Thank you for saying that, I said carefully. It means a lot to hear you acknowledge those things, but rebuilding trust takes time, Danny. It can't happen in a single conversation. I know, he said quickly. I don't expect you to just forget everything and go back to how things were. That's not even what I want, actually. This surprised me. What do you want? He considered the question seriously. I want a healthier relationship. One where we both respect each other's boundaries and independence. One where I'm not constantly expecting you to sacrifice for me. He hesitated. And I want James to know his grandmother, to learn from you the things I clearly didn't, like how to treat people with dignity, how to stand up for yourself without tearing others down. His words warmed something inside me, but I remained cautious. Those are good intentions, Danny. The question is whether they'll translate into consistent actions. That's fair, he acknowledged. I guess I'm asking for a chance to prove it over time. Not expecting immediate trust or forgiveness, just an open door maybe? The possibility of rebuilding? I thought about the photos of James, about the genuine remorse in Danny's voice, about the effort he was making toward self-awareness. I think that's reasonable, I said finally. Small steps. Maybe we could meet for coffee again next week? And perhaps, if that goes well, I could meet James sometime? The relief and hope in Danny's expression were palpable. I'd like that, both of those things. We finished our coffee, the conversation shifting to more neutral topics. My watercolor classes, his work projects, the changing landscape of Oak Ridge. As we prepared to leave, Danny hesitated. There's one more thing you should know, he said. Victoria and I are putting the house up for sale. I blinked, surprised. The house in Lakewood? Why? A few reasons, he replied. Practically speaking, it's too expensive. The mortgage payments are stretching us thin, especially with childcare costs. But it's more than that. He looked uncomfortable. The house, it represents a lot of the problems in our relationship. The status seeking, the financial strain, the way we treated you when you offered to help with James. He met my eyes. Also, I've never felt right about living there, knowing it was bought with money you saved for years. It feels tainted, somehow. I wasn't sure how to respond. The house had been a source of pain for me, a symbol of my sacrifices and their ingratitude. Yet hearing Danny acknowledge this felt oddly validating. What will you do instead? I asked. We're looking. At smaller places, maybe in Brighton Hills. Something more modest, where we can live within our means. He offered a small smile. Victoria's not thrilled about downsizing, but she's coming around. The therapy has helped her see that constantly striving for more status, more luxury, more everything, hasn't actually made her happy. That's a significant realization, I observed. Yeah, for both of us. Danny looked at me hesitantly. I know it's a lot to ask, but would you be willing to come with us sometime? To look at houses, I mean. You have good judgment about these things, and it would mean a lot to have your input. The request surprised me. It was such a normal, practical thing, a son asking his mother's opinion on a major purchase. Yet it represented something profound, Danny seeking my counsel as a person with valuable perspective, not just as a potential source of financial assistance. "I'd be happy to," I said, meaning it. We parted with a brief, slightly awkward hug, the physical distance between us a tangible reminder of the emotional space we were still navigating. But as I watched him walk away, I felt a cautious optimism I hadn't expected when I woke that morning. True to his word, Danny continued to make consistent efforts over the following months. Our weekly coffee dates became a pleasant routine. He never asked for money or material assistance, instead seeking my advice on parenting challenges or work decisions. When I mentioned an upcoming art exhibition I was interested in attending, he offered to accompany me, showing genuine curiosity about my new interests. 3 months after our first meeting, I finally met James. Danny and Victoria brought him to my home for a Sunday brunch on the riverside deck. At 15 months old, he was a sturdy, curious child with Danny's eyes and Victoria's determined chin. He toddled around my living room, examining everything within reach, occasionally bringing me treasures: a coaster, a river stone from my collection, a fallen leaf, with solemn ceremony. To my surprise, Victoria was cordial, even warm at times. The brittle edge that had characterized our previous interactions had softened considerably. While Danny played with James on the deck, she helped me serve the meal, using the moment of privacy to offer her own apology. "I was horrible to you," she said bluntly, arranging fruit on a platter. "There's no excuse for how we treated you when you told us you were retiring. My mother's influence was part of it, but that doesn't justify my behavior." I appreciated her directness. "Thank you for acknowledging that. It means a lot." "Therapy has been illuminating," she admitted, a wry smile touching her lips. "Turns out I have some deep-seated issues around money and status. Who knew, right?" Her self-deprecating tone made me smile despite our complicated history. Growth is never easy, but it's always worthwhile. Victoria nodded, her expression thoughtful. When I was pregnant with James, I was terrified of being a mother. I kept thinking about my relationship with my own mother, how controlling she is, how she measures everything in terms of appearances and social standing. I didn't want to be that kind of parent, but I didn't know how to be anything else. She glanced out at Danny and James. "Watching you with Danny, even just today, it's different. There's a warmth there, a genuine interest in him as a person, not just as an extension of yourself." The observation touched me deeply. Despite all our conflicts, despite the distance that still existed between us, she had seen something fundamental about my approach to motherhood. "I made plenty of mistakes," I told her. "I probably gave too. Much sometimes didn't set enough boundaries." "Maybe," she acknowledged, "but your intentions were loving. That matters." She hesitated. "I'd like James to have that kind of relationship with his grandmother, if you're open to it. Not as a babysitter or a checkbook, but as a person in his life who loves him unconditionally." The olive branch was unexpected, but welcome. "I'd like that very much." That Sunday brunch became the first of many family gatherings. Not weekly, we all needed our space and independence, but regular enough to establish a rhythm, to build new memories untainted by the conflicts of the past. As promised, I accompanied Danny and Victoria on several house hunting expeditions. The properties they considered were indeed more modest than their Lakewood home. Comfortable but not ostentatious, within their actual financial means rather than stretching beyond them. I offered opinions when asked, but otherwise maintained a respectful distance from their decision-making process. Eventually, they settled on a charming craftsman-style home in a family-friendly neighborhood, about 20 minutes from my place in Riverside Estates. The house needed some cosmetic updates, but had good bones and a spacious backyard where James could play. Most importantly, it represented a conscious choice to value substance over appearance, financial stability over status seeking. On moving day, I arrived with coffee and pastries for everyone. As we unpacked boxes and arranged furniture, there was an easy camaraderie among us that felt both novel and natural, as if we were discovering what our relationship could have been all along, without the distortions of entitlement or resentment. During a quiet moment, Danny found me alone in the kitchen, unpacking dishes. "Thank you for being here today," he said, reaching for a stack of plates to shelve. "It means a lot to have your support." "I'm happy to help," I replied. "This is a lovely home, Danny. A good place for James to grow up." He nodded, a contemplative expression crossing his face. "You know, when we sold the Lakewood house, we ended up with some equity. Not a lot, but some. Victoria and I talked about what to do with it. We could have put it all toward this place, lowered our mortgage." He hesitated. "But instead, we decided to start a college fund for James. Something separate from our regular finances, specifically for his education." I paused in my unpacking, sensing there was more to this story. "The thing is," Danny continued, his voice softer, "I never realized until recently how much you sacrificed to put me through college. Working extra shifts, living in that small apartment, going without so many things most people take for granted. You never complained, so I never really saw it. Or maybe I didn't want to see it." I felt a lump form in my throat at his recognition of sacrifices I had made so willingly, yet which had gone unacknowledged for so long. "Anyway," he continued, "I want to do for James what you did for me, build that security for his future. But I want to do it differently, not at the expense of everything else, not by martyring myself, just responsibly, consistently as part of a balanced life." "That sounds like wisdom to me," I said, touched by his reflection. Danny smiled, a hint of his boyish self showing through. "I had a good teacher, even if I was a slow learner." The moment was interrupted by James toddling into the kitchen, clutching a stuffed elephant. "Dada!" he proclaimed, lifting his arms to be picked up. Danny swung him into the air, eliciting delighted giggles. "Should we show Grandma your new room?" Danny asked him. "It's all set up with your big boy bed." James nodded enthusiastically, and Danny glanced at me. "Want to see?" "Victoria's been planning it for weeks." I followed them upstairs to a cheerful room painted in soft blues and greens. A toddler bed with a train-patterned comforter stood against one wall, while bookshelves filled with children's stories lined another. What caught my eye, however, was a framed photograph on the dresser. One I hadn't seen before. It showed a much younger me holding baby Danny on my lap, both of us laughing at something outside the frame. The simple joy captured in our expressions brought tears to my eyes. "Where did you find this?" I asked, picking up the frame. "In some old albums while we were packing," Danny replied. "I'd forgotten about it, but when I saw it, I don't know, it reminded me of what matters, of who we were before everything got complicated." I studied the image, remembering that day, a rare moment of pure happiness amid the struggles of single motherhood. It's a beautiful memory. Lights twinkled on in neighboring houses, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called softly to its mate. At 66, I had finally learned what had eluded me for decades, that I was valuable not for what I gave others, but simply for who I was. And that realization, more than any inheritance, was the true fortune I had discovered in retirement. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. Danny shifted James to his other hip. "I want him to know you, Mom. Not just as his grandmother now, but the whole story. How hard you worked, how much you sacrificed, how strong you were even when I didn't appreciate it." The words healed something deep within me. Not just his recognition of my sacrifices, but his desire to honor them by sharing that legacy with his son. "Thank you," I said simply. knowing he would understand all that those two words encompassed. As the seasons continued to cycle, our new family dynamic settled into a comfortable rhythm. I saw James regularly, but not excessively, enough to build a genuine relationship without overstepping boundaries or creating dependency. Danny and Victoria continued their therapy, both individually and as a couple, working through the issues that had nearly torn them apart. On warm days, I sometimes invited them to my home for weekends on the river. James developed a fascination with the herons that stalked the shallows, watching them with the intense concentration only toddlers can muster. During one such visit, as James napped and Victoria relaxed with a book on the deck, Danny joined me in the kitchen where I was, preparing dinner. "I have some news," he said, leaning against the counter. "I've been offered a new position at work. More responsibility, better pay." "That's wonderful," I replied, genuinely pleased for him. "You've worked hard for that recognition." "Thanks." He hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically nervous. "The thing is, it would mean more travel. Not constant, but regular trips to the regional offices, maybe a week each month." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "Victoria and I have been talking about childcare options for those weeks. Her mother offered to stay with them when I'm away, but—" He trailed off, grimacing slightly. I understood his hesitation. Despite the improvements in everyone's behavior, Patricia still had a tendency to overstep boundaries and impose her opinions. "We were wondering," Danny continued carefully, "if you might be interested in spending some time with James during those weeks. Not full-time childcare. Victoria would still handle most of it, but maybe a few afternoons or an overnight. Only if you want to, of course. No pressure." The request touched me, not because it represented an opportunity to spend time with James, though I valued that, but because it demonstrated trust. Danny and Victoria were inviting me into a meaningful role in their family life, not out of desperation or expectation, but from a place of genuine respect and affection. "I'd be happy to," I told him. "James and I would have a wonderful time, together." The relief and gratitude in Danny's expression was evident. "That means a lot, Mom, to both of us." As we worked side by side preparing dinner, I reflected on how far we had come. The journey hadn't been easy. It had required painful confrontations, firm boundaries, and the courage to demand respect even from those closest to me. But the relationship we were building now, one based on mutual respect rather than obligation, on genuine affection rather than manipulation, was infinitely more satisfying than what had existed before. That evening, as we all gathered around my dining table, the conversation flowing easily among us, I caught Danny watching me with a thoughtful expression. Later, as they prepared to leave, he hung back for a moment while Victoria buckled a sleepy James into his car seat. "You know," he said quietly, "I never really understood why Dr. Anderson left you his fortune until recently. I kept thinking, there must be some other explanation, some special relationship or arrangement I didn't know about." I frowned slightly. "Danny, I told you." I know," he interrupted gently. "But I didn't get it. Not really. Not until I started seeing you differently. Not just as my mom, but as Eleanor Johnson, a whole person with her own life and value." He smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "Now I understand. He saw in you what I'm finally beginning to see, a remarkable woman who deserves every happiness, every comfort, every recognition." The words washed over me like a blessing, healing wounds I hadn't realized were still tender. "Thank you," I whispered. As I watched their car pull away, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The inheritance from Dr. Anderson had transformed my life, not just materially but in ways I could never have anticipated. It had forced a reckoning that, while painful, had ultimately led to authentic healing. It had given me the means to discover who I truly was when I wasn't defined solely by sacrifice and service. Most importantly, it had taught me that true worth isn't measured in dollars, but in dignity, in the courage to stand up for oneself, to demand respect, to live authentically even when it means walking away from the familiar. I turned back toward my home, my sanctuary, my haven, as twilight descended over the river.